Hello there. We are on chapter 11. It's called Indiscretions. Usually, indiscretions are something where you've been told not to do something and then you do it. Or where you've been given a privilege and you take advantage of that privilege. So, indiscretions. This is coming off of the chapter where it talked about Rowan having his friend over to Scythe Faraday's house, and then also Citra realizing that the new form of martial arts they're learning. She went up against Rowan and thought she could have beat him, but in the end started having maybe some feelings for him. She felt his heart pounding and was kind of caught off guard. So, chapter 11, Indiscretions. Citra and Rowan were not always together at gleanings. Sometimes Scythe Faraday took just one of them. The worst gleaning Citra witnessed took place in early May, just a few weeks before Vernal Conclave, the first of 3 conclaves she and Rowan would attend during their apprenticeship. Their quarry was a man who had turned the corner and reset his age to 24. He was at home having dinner with his wife and 2 kids, who seemed to be around Citra's age. When Scythe Faraday announced who they had come for, the family wept and the man slipped off into the bedroom. Scythe Faraday had chosen a peaceful bloodletting for the man, but that was not what happened. When Citra and the Scythe entered the room, he ambushed them. The man was in peak condition, and in the arrogance of his new rejuvenation, he rejected his gleaning and fought the Scythe, breaking his jaw with a vicious punch. Citra came to his aid, trying some of her martial arts move that she learned from Scythe Yin Yang, and quickly learned that applying a martial art is much different than practicing in a dojo. The man swatted her away and advanced on Faraday, who was still reeling from his injury. Citra leapt on him again, clinging to him, for the moment giving up on anything beyond eye gouging and hair pulling. It distracted him just long enough for Scythe Faraday to pull out a hunting knife he had concealed in his robe, and he slit the man's throat. He began gasping for air, his hands to his neck, trying futilely to hold back the flow of blood. And Scythe Faraday, holding a hand to his own swelling jaw, spoke to him, not with malice, but with great sorrow. "Do you understand the consequences of what you have done?" The man could not answer. He fell to the ground, quivering, gasping. Citra thought death from such a wound would be instantaneous, but apparently not. She had never seen so much blood. "Stay here," the Scythe told her. "Look upon him kindly, and be the last that he sees." Then he left the room. Citra knew what he was going to do. The law was very clear as to the consequences of running from or resisting one's gleaning. She couldn't close her eyes because she was instructed not to. But if there was a way, she wished she could have closed her ears because she knew what she was about to hear from the living room. It began with pleas from the woman begging for the lives of her children and the children sobbing in despair. "Do not beg," Citra heard the Scythe say sharply. "Show these children more courage than your husband did." Citra kept her gaze fixed on the dying man's until his eyes finally emptied of life, and then she went and joined Scythe Faraday, steeling herself for what was to come. The 2 children were on the sofa, their sobs having degraded into tearful whimpers. The woman was on her knees, whispering to them, comforting them. "Are you quite done?" the Scythe said impatiently. At last the woman rose. Her eyes were tearful, but there was no longer seemed pleading. "Do what you have to do," she said. "Good," said the Scythe. "I applaud your fortitude. Now, as it happens, your husband did not resist his gleaning." And then he touched his swelling face. "However, my apprentice and I had an altercation resulting in these wounds." The woman just stared at him, her jaw slightly unhinged. So was Citra's. The Scythe turned to Citra and glared at her. "My apprentice shall be severely disciplined for fighting with me." And then he turned back to the woman. "Please kneel." The woman fell to her knees. Not so much a kneel as a collapse. Scythe Faraday held out his ring to her. "As is customary, you and your children shall receive immunity from gleaning for 1 year henceforth. Each of you, please kiss my ring." The woman kissed it again and again and again. Wait a second. That's not what happened. So Scythe Faraday is changing some of his procedures. The Scythe said little after they left. They rode a bus because whenever possible, the Scythe avoided the use of public cars. He saw it as an extravagance. When they got off at their stop, Citra dared to speak. Shall I be disciplined for breaking your jaw? Citra knew it would be healed by morning, but the healing nanonites were not spontaneous. He still looked pretty awful. You will speak to no one of this, he told her sternly. You will not even comment on it to your journal. Is that clear? The man's indiscretion shall never be known. Yes, Your Honor. She wanted to tell him how much she admired him for what he had done, choosing compassion over obligation. There was a lesson to be learned in every gleaning, and today's was one that she would not soon forget: the sanctity of the law and the wisdom to know when it must be broken. Citra, try as she might to be a stellar apprentice, was not immune to indiscretions herself. One of Citra's nightly chores was to bring Scythe Faraday a glass of warm milk before bed. As in my childhood, warm milk soothes the edges of the day, the Scythe had told her. I have, however, dispensed with the cookie that once came with it. The thought of a Scythe having milk and cookies before bed bordered on absurd to Citra, but she supposed even an agent of death would have guilty pleasures. Quite often, however, when a gleaning had been difficult, he would fall asleep before she came into the room at the appointed time with the milk. In those cases, she would drink it herself, or she'd give it to Rowan because Scythe Faraday made it clear that nothing in his household was ever wasted. On the night that awful gleaning, she lingered in his room a bit longer. Scythe Faraday, she said gently. Then said it again. No response. She could tell he was breathing. He was not out. There was an object on the nightstand. In fact, it was there every night, his ring. It caught the oblique light spilling in from the hallway. Even in the dim room, it glittered. She downed the glass of milk and set it on the nightstand, so that in the morning the Scythe would see that she had brought it and that it had not been wasted. Then she knelt there, her eyes fixed on the ring. She wondered why he never slept with it on, but felt that asking would be some part of an intrusion. When she received hers, if she received hers, would it retain the solemn mystery that it held for her now, or would it be ordinary to her? Would she come to take it for granted? She reached forward, then drew her hand back, then reached forward again and gently took the ring. She turned it in her finger so that it caught the light. The stone was big, about the size of an acorn. Oh, wow, that's pretty big. It was said to be a diamond, but there was a darkness in its core that made it different from a simple diamond ring. There was something in the core of that ring that no one knew what it was. She wondered if even the Scythes themselves knew. The center wasn't exactly black. It was a deep discoloration that looked different depending on the light, the way a person's eyes sometimes do that. Then, when she glanced at the Scythe, she could see that his eyes were open and watching her. She froze, knowing she was caught, knowing that putting the ring down now wouldn't change that. Would you like to try it on? Scythe Faraday asked. No, she said. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched it. You shouldn't have, but you did. She wondered if he had been awake this whole time. Go ahead, he told her. Try it on. I insist. She was dubious, but did as she was told, because in spite of what she told him, she did want to try it on. It felt warm on her fingers. It was size for the Scythe, so it was too large for her, but it was also heavier than she imagined. Do you worry that it will ever be stolen? She asked. Not really. Anyone foolish enough to steal a Scythe's ring is quickly removed from the world, so they cease to be a problem. The ring was getting considerably cooler. Is it a covetable item, though? Don't you agree? The Scythe then said. Suddenly, Citra realized the ring wasn't just cool. It was freezing. The metal, in a matter of seconds, had grown white with frost, and her finger was in such intense pain from the cold, she cried out and she pulled the ring from her hand. It flew across the room. Not only was her ring finger severely frostbitten, so were the fingers that had pulled it free. She bit back a whimper. She could now feel warmth flowing through her body, as if the healing nanites released morphine. She became woozy, but forced herself to stay alert. A security measure I installed myself, the Scythe then said. a micro coolant chip in the setting. Let me see. And he turned on his nightstand light and grabbed her hand, looking at her ring finger. The flesh at the joint was pale blue and frozen solid. In the age of mortality, you might have lost the finger, but I trust your nanonites are already mending the damage. He let go of her hand. You'll be fine by morning. Perhaps next time you'll think before touching things that don't belong to you. He retrieved his ring, set it back on the nightstand, then handed her the empty glass. From now on, Rowan will bring me my evening milk, he then said. Citra deflated. I'm sorry I disappointed you, Your Honor. You're right. I don't deserve to bring you your milk. He raised an eyebrow. You misunderstood. This is not a punishment. Curiosity is human. I merely allowed you to get it out of your system. I have to say, it took long enough. And then he gave her a little conspiratorial grin. Now let's see how long it takes Rowan to go for the ring. Ooh, I like that. All right, here's from the journal. Sometimes when the weight of my job becomes overwhelming, I begin to lament on all the things lost when we conquered death. I think about religion and how once we became our own saviors, our own gods, most faiths became irrelevant. What must it have been like to believe in something greater than oneself, to accept imperfection and look to a rising vision of all we could ever be? It must have been comforting. It must have been frightening. It must have lifted people from the mundane, but also justified all sorts of evil. I often wonder if the bright benefits of belief outweighed the darkness its abuse could bring. There are the tone cults, of course, dressing in sackcloth and worshiping sonic vibrations. But like so many things in our world, they seek to imitate what once was. Their rituals are not to be taken seriously. They exist merely to make the passing of time feel meaningful and profound. Lately, I've been preoccupied with a tone cult in my neighborhood. I went into their gathering place the other day. I was there to glean one of the cult's congregants, a man who had not yet turned his first corner. They were intoning what they called the resonant frequency of the universe. One of them told me that the sound is alive and that harmonizing with it brings inner peace. I wonder, when they look at the great tuning fork that stands as a symbol of their faith, if they truly believe it to be a symbol of power, or are they just joining in a communal joke? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curry. That's it for today.